Today we're looking at the best meta decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And ranking them so you know which decks really are the best of the best. How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another video. The Infinite Forbidden is releasing in 1 week's time at your local OTS, and this set is crazy. Is it going to be as good as Age of Overlord? Probably not, but it definitely is the best set we've had since then. There are so many new amazing strategies and archetypes that are being released, and a ton that are getting a lot of support as well. So today I wanted to take a look at all of the new cards that are coming out in Age of Overlord and how they actually impact the meta, and go over a tier list for the top 25 or so best meta decks. Our tiers are best of the best, which is pretty self-explanatory, top tier potential for strategies that could eventually move to the best of the best tier with a few small changes to the meta or new releases, has a chance is the tier for decks that could definitely top the WCQs, but it's not as expected. Better options are for decks that struggle with the best decks or are missing some pieces, and Rogue are for decks that are going to have low representation and success rates at these big events. So if you're excited for the video, then make sure to smash the like button. If we can hit 300 likes on the video, I'll bring you the ultimate guide on how to beat Fiendsmith Snake Eye, and spoilers, it's going to be everywhere. Subscribe to the channel if you like Yu-Gi-Oh! And want to get better at the game, but with that being said, here are the best meta decks for the July 2024 post-Infinite Forbidden competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. Let's jump into it. Starting off our tier list, we have Branded Despia. Now, Branded is a deck that's been around for a long time, and it's a very good strategy in this format. It's got a ton of different ways to interrupt the opponent, including banishing, fusing away with their monsters, and so on, but most importantly, they have the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare lock with Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. As long as this part of the strategy remains legal, this deck is going to have a home in the format today. It used to be a deck that had a harder time dealing with a hand trap like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, but now because of cards like Fusion Duplication and Branded in High Spirits, they don't really care too much and can still puppet lock even if they did get hit with Ash Blossom, which is crazy to think about. And for those reasons, Branded has top tier potential. Next up is Centurion, another deck that really focuses on locking the opponent out of the game with a copy of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. This card is really oppressive, and honestly, Centurion does a fantastic job of summoning it out pretty consistently, but they do get some new tools in the Infinite Forbidden, specifically in the Whitewoods cards. So while I'm not going to talk about just Whitewoods, but Centurion with the Whitewoods cards in general are very strong. They're able to establish a lot of good powerful synchro monsters, and that's really good if their main combo to lock you out of the game with Calamity does get interrupted. But it's still a deck that is pretty weak overall compared to a lot of other strategies in the game today. While Whitewoods does give a buff to Centurion, it's not enough of a buff for the deck to be really a top tier threat. And for that reason, in my opinion, there are better options. Illusion Chimera, also known as just Chimera in general, is getting a lot of good indirect support in the Infinite Forbidden. The strategy utilizes a lot of level 6 monsters, including Chimera King and of course Nightmare Apprentice, which are good level 6 bodies but do a lot more than just be an actual body. The end board is still extremely diverse, including cards like Chimera Fusion set face down to go for a Guardian Chimera on the opposing turn. You can also have an Evil Zor Lars for extra negation, Appaloosa if you want to go that way, and even Chaos Angel on top of that. The problem is there are so many good illusion monsters in the game today that you're really kind of losing a lot of space for non-engine to make the deck as consistent and high-powered as possible. I think it's a good deck, but it doesn't really do anything that much better than the top tier decks in the game, so for that reason I'm putting it in the has a chance tier. Genex is a really fun deck if you can actually protect the Link 1 monster from targeted effect negation like Imperm, Veiler, or Ghost Mourner, and that's why cards like Crossout Designator and of course Ceravis are pretty much must plays in the strategy. The deck can end on a ton of different negation tools, including the new Genex Arms card, which can essentially be 6 monster negates depending on the attributes in your graveyard and the attributes being used by your opponent, but it's still able to just generate so much disruption on the opposing turn. The problem is you really have to protect your Link 1 monster, and if you can't do that, the deck just won't find any success. So for that reason, I'm putting Genex in Rogue. Gimmick Puppet is another deck that has a lot of potential and got so much new support from the Infinite Forbidden, the most important of which is the new Field Spell. This card is ridiculous, and it basically makes all of the Gimmick Puppet monsters you control unaffected by your opponent's cards, which means that you can essentially go full combo without worrying about pretty much anything, and that's very scary, especially when you consider a deck can just easily FTK like this one can. When going first, the deck is incredible, partly because of that FTK, but going second, it has a really hard time to not only effectively break boards, but actually use the engine to play through enough interruption that there's going to be, especially if they don't have the field spell. And while I do think that Gimmick Puppet is a top 10 or so best deck of the format, I just expect that the deck is going to fall off slowly but surely as the format continues to evolve and we figure out how to handle Gimmick Puppet more and more. But for now, it does have top tier potential. Then we have Ice Barrier, which is another strategy with two different variants I want to talk to you about. The first one is going to be the pure Ice Barrier deck, which is pretty cool at setting up a good amount of water disruptions. It's just not going to be as good as a Runic Ice Barrier variant. That one can draw a ton of cards, like up to 7 cards in a single turn thanks to Runic Fountain, Ravenous Croco Dragon, and of course Coral Dragon, and still put up a good amount of negation as well. And of course, because you have the Runic cards, you have built-in interruption into the actual engine on top of that. If you can't consistently draw cards as part of the engine, you're going to have a really hard time. So for that reason, it belongs in the better options tier. My first reaction to Infernoid after Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge was that this deck was going to be the best deck receiving support in that set, and I was dead wrong. While the deck is still very solid, it does have a couple problems. First off, Infernoid Evil, while it is pretty much a custom card, it's not always going to be accessible, especially because you have to play so many bricks in your deck. And while the deck can play the Sinful Spoils and Diabellstar package, it does it very well, it just doesn't do it as well as so many other strategies in the game today, so why really play this unless you have an affinity for Infernoid? There are just too many bricks to play, and you could catch some people off guard with how good the Infernoid cards are, and if you do manage to go full combo, then it's really strong, but I do have to put it in the rogue tier. Kashtira is a shifter deck through and through, and if you don't see shifter, you're going to have a really hard time playing Kashtira because the engine itself doesn't really have a big payoff anymore. Sure, you have big monsters like Kashtira Unicorn to rip out the extra deck, Kashtira Fenrir to get rid of cards on the field, and of course Kashtira Birth to disrupt the graveyard. It's just not as good as it needs to be. The engine doesn't have that payoff anymore in a Rise Heart. Kashtira though is still a really solid deck because of how good cards like Fenrir and Unicorn are, and of course if you manage to draw Shifter and get lucky with your opening hand, then you're going to be able to get a lot of wins, so for that reason I do think that Kashtira has a chance. So Labrynth is in a really interesting spot because while it does lock itself into Fiend monsters, it doesn't really pair that well with the Fiendsmith cards. And if you have the Fiendsmith cards and want to play a Fiend deck, honestly, just play Yubel. Trap decks are fine in the format overall, and while the strategy does kind of rely heavily on the advantage loop created by the Chandragleer, Stovey Torby, and Kuklok, your welcome traps and your big Labrynth monsters, the deck itself is just kind of lackluster overall. Going first, it can be pretty solid, but if you get interrupted on the welcome traps, it kind of ruins your game plan a lot. And going second, while it is the best trap deck ever at going second, I just think that right now with the amount of negation available and hand traps in the format, it's much harder to effectively play Labrynth than it has been in the past. And for that reason, Labrynth, in my opinion, is a rogue deck. I like Melodious a lot as a deck. I think it's a really solid strategy with a ton of great combos. And especially in this format where so many people are maining hand traps over board breakers, Melodious just plays through hand traps like it's nothing. Partly because of the powerful one-card starters and engine pieces it has, but also because they can easily play Herald of the Orange Light to be able to beat those hand traps. And while the end board is definitely very threatening, the deck has a hard time dealing with cards like Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplet, among other board breakers. If you manage to negate their field, then you can just break through the entire board and OTK. But it's just so strong going first, and there are so few board breakers in the format compared to hand traps that I really have to put Melodious into top tier potential. Memento Clan or Memento is an awesome combo deck, and who would have thought after all the support we've gotten in the past few sets that Memento would be arguably one of the best combo decks in the game today. I love how the end board is so diversified in terms of what cards are actually doing the interrupting. You're not only relying on monsters or hand traps or even just back row cards, it's a good mix of all of them, which is really appreciated. You have of course your Cranium Blast, the trap card, which is an insane card being essentially 5 negations for monsters, which is crazy. You have your Memento Fusion as well, which can allow you to go into Guardian Chimera on your opponent's turn and pop 2, draw 1, draw 2, pop 1, whatever the case might be. and of course you also have follow-up on your turn because that's just part of the combo itself. Memento is a deck that I want to learn more about because in my opinion it's a strategy with top tier potential. Purrely is a good deck that's also incredibly budget, but I don't have the highest hopes for it. Sure, getting to Noir, especially a big Noir, is very good at getting you a win, but I don't trust that it can consistently do that or get to a Noir big enough to actually pose enough of a threat against a deck like Snake Eye, for example. Purrely also doesn't get any new cards in the Infinite Forbidden to actually buff up the strategy, while other decks which were already better than Purrely are getting so much stronger. In the hands of the right pilot, I do think that Purrely can perform very well, but in my opinion there are still better options. Rescue Ace is definitely the worst of the good fire decks that are actually using the Sinful Spoils or Diabellstar engine in their strategy. The deck itself does have a lot going for it though in terms of the way it can remove cards from the field, it can take advantage of Appaloosa and of course all of your powerful Rescue Ace spell and trap cards, and while it can play the Fiendsmith cards, it doesn't use them well enough compared to the other fire decks in the game today. On top of that, you're playing a ton of bricks in the strategy, which means you're playing so many less pieces of non-engine to actually counter the opponent when you're going second. Rescue Ace just isn't as high powered or consistent as the other good fire decks, and for that reason it belongs in the rogue tier. So I feel bad here because I was definitely sleeping on Ritual Beast. This deck is incredible, and it's easily the best shifter deck of the format. Not because it relies on shifter, but because it uses it as part of its combo as well, turning Rampengu essentially into a one-card combo that also gives you advantage because shifter interrupts the opponent too. What makes Ritual Beast so good is that they have so many different ways to interrupt the opponent. Sure, they have their Ritual Beast cards including Steeds and the new Link 4 monster, but they also have an easy way to get to Arch Nemesis Protoss, which when you call Fire or Dark can completely shut down two of the best decks in the game in Snake Eye and Yubel. If Protoss was still banned, the deck would be significantly weaker, but that's not the case. For right now, Ritual Beast definitely has top tier potential. Pure Snake Eye was the best deck of the previous format, and now that we have the Infinite Forbidden and the new Fiendsmith cards, it's now even better. The Fiendsmith cards get you to the Snake Eye cards, the Snake Eye cards get you to the Fiendsmith cards. There are so many incredible starters and extenders with Diabellstar, Wanted, Bonfire, and so on. The deck is incredible, has amazing one-card combos, can easily break through boards, play a ton of non-engine, and its one-card combo ends on so many amazing forms of disruption, including Appaloosa, Promethean Princess, IP Masquerena, potentially even the DDD rank 6. There are so many amazing tools at your disposal in this strategy, and in my opinion, it easily falls into the best of the best tier. On the other hand though is Snake Eye Fire King, which is still a very good deck, but just not as good as pure Snake Eye or Snake Eye Fiendsmith in my opinion. The Fire King cards, while they are very good and increase the ceiling of the deck, they also lower the floor because you have more potential bricks in the strategy, and you have another choke point in the deck as well in Fire King Island. While I really like Snake Eye Fire King and think the deck is fantastic, it's just not on the same level as the previous decks I mentioned. So for that reason, Snake Eye Fire King belongs in the top tier potential category. Snake Eye Kashtira is the next Snake Eye variant we're going to talk about, and it's not going to be the last. Snake Eye Cash essentially uses a small Kashtira package of like unicorns, births, and Fenrirs to be able to interrupt the opponent. And the reason why I think it works so well with this strategy is twofold. First off, it offers you a great body on the field for a link summoning or interruption if need be, but second, if your Snake Eye deck gets hit with a shifter, you actually have a decent tool on the field to be able to interrupt the opponent while also being able to survive until you can then combo off on the next turn and win the game. The Kashtira package is also quite small, so you can still do all of your Snake Eye shenanigans and also play a ton of hand traps too. And for that reason, I believe that Snake Eye Kashtira also belongs in the best of the best tier. And the final Snake Eye variant I'm going to talk about today is going to be pure Snake Eye. This is essentially Snake Eye Fiendsmith but without the Fiendsmith cards, so basically what we were playing pre-Infinite Forbidden. Now while this deck is a good deal weaker than the Fiendsmith variant, it's still incredibly strong and nothing to laugh at. Pretty much every single deck that's not exactly a Snake Eye Fiendsmith deck or a other Fiendsmith variant has a very hard time competing with a pure Snake Eye list, and I think it's for good reason. There's a reason why on everyone's ban list wish lists and predictions that Snake Eye is getting hit into the dirt. The deck is absolutely disgusting even without all the Fiendsmith cards, and it definitely belongs in the best of the best tier. Spright has fallen off from where it once was, but it's actually better now than where it's been the past couple of months, and that's because of Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge releasing Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier. This card alone makes it so that you can now go into Totally Awesome once again. And you can do that before starting your main combo, so if your copy of Gigantic Spright would get hit with infinite impermanence, you can use Totally Awesome to negate that and have your combo go uninterrupted. And while Totally Awesome is great, you can also use the Nimble cards and the Melfi cards to help you get access to Herald of the Arclight, which is still a great piece of interruption for this strategy. But I actually have this deck quite low on my tier list because right now we're seeing cards like Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplet being absolutely incredible cards in the format. And both these cards are really good at dealing with the Spright endboard. So for that reason, while Spright is very good and has gotten better with the new support, in my opinion, there are better options. Tenpai Dragon got a few new tools in the Infinite Forbidden, but which one is better? Is it the new Yellow Dragon Genroku, which is essentially a Snake Eye Poplar, or is it Dora Draco, which on its own represents basically 3 Fire Dragon monsters on the field? The answer is both. Both are amazing and really increase the power level for what this deck can do. It OTKs effortlessly, and thanks to the field spell, it can also break boards with just its engine alone. The deck is fantastic, and in my opinion, it is squarely in the best of the best tier. Up next is Unchained Fiendsmith, and while the Unchained cards are very good and the Fiendsmith cards are excellent, why would you play this version of Fiendsmith if you have the cards for it? Why not just pivot to another Fiend deck and play something like Yubel Fiendsmith instead? The Unchained cards are very good at being used in other strategies and do have a lot of merit on their own, but it just isn't as strong, consistent, or honestly as good in general as other strategies, so I would rather play other options instead. So for that reason, easily, Unchained Fiendsmith belongs in the better options tier. Voiceless Voice is a relatively new archetype, but it honestly feels like it's already been power crept into this format. The deck has gotten pretty much no new support from this set here, and right now it just feels like it's a step behind so many of the top decks in the game. Going first, it sets up a pretty good combo. It's not the best, but it's solid overall, and going second, it can have a really tough time doing anything with just its engine alone. Just in the previous format, I would have argued that Voiceless Voice was a top 5 deck. Now, I don't even think it's a top 10 deck, which is crazy to think about. But if we get some changes to the ban list that would impact the top tier decks, I can definitely see Voiceless Voice rising once again. But I still think the deck is solid overall, so for that reason, I'll put it in the has a chance tier. The White Woods archetype is a new synchro-based strategy coming out in the Infinite Forbidden, and it pairs so well with so many different strategies, one of which being the toy engine that came out in Terminal Revenge. This engine itself paired with the Whitewood strategy works so well because they both get advantages when sending spell cards from the field to the graveyard, so getting that extra advantage allows for extra extension, extra bodies, and more interruption. But you can also use it with the Centurion cards, which I spoke about before, and you can also pair it with the Runic cards as well. But the worst way to play this strategy is easily going to be as a pure variant. You definitely want to take advantage of Whitewoods when being paired with another engine to make it reach its max potential. But as a combo deck, Whitewoods just isn't as good as so many of the other possible options out there, so for that reason, there are better options. Pure Yubel is basically just the Yubel deck pre-Infinite Forbidden, so just no Fiendsmith cards, and it's still a very good deck with a ton of really unique ways to interrupt the opponent, including Phantom of Yubel, your Nightmare Pains, you have access to the Verrugas for an Omni Negate, you have the Unchained Soul of Rage as well, and Yama in the graveyard, and so much more. My issue with it is that it's just not as high powered or consistent as the new Fiendsmith Yubel deck we're going to be getting once the Infinite Forbidden officially releases. But I still respect the non-Fiendsmith version of Yubel quite a bit, so for that reason I'll put it in the has a chance tier. And the final deck in this video is going to be none other than Fiendsmith Yubel. This, in my opinion, is another amazing deck. It is arguably the second or third best deck in the format above pretty much everything else. The strategy is able to set up a ton of amazing forms of interruption, it's consistent, it uses the Fiendsmith cards arguably better than any other strategy in the game today, maybe other than Snake Eye, but the deck is able to do so much. The Yubel cards already have such a great matchup against some of the other best strategies in the game, like Tenpai Dragon for example, and it's able to just add to it with the Fiendsmith cards. In my opinion, Yubel Fiendsmith could definitely win the NAWCQs and would be easily one of the best decks for the Worlds format. So for those reasons, Yubel Fiendsmith definitely belongs in the best of the best tier. But this is my tier list for the best decks in the post-Infinite Forbidden competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we learn from the Nationals format, and hopefully it'll prove me right and maybe it'll prove me wrong. If you think I placed a deck in the wrong tier, let me know down in the comments, and also let me know if there's another deck that I didn't mention that you want my thoughts on as well. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, and don't forget that if we hit 300 likes on this video, I'll bring you the ultimate guide on how to beat the new Snake Eye Fiendsmith deck, and I'll release it before the NAWCQ. Subscribe if you like Yu-Gi-Oh! And you want to get better at the game. Also, only about 15% of my viewers are actually subscribed to the channel. You may think you are because you're getting recommended my videos, but just double check just in case. Thank you to my channel members for going above and beyond supporting the channel, and thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.